I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The winter reception at Sandringham was supposed to be controlled, private, and forgettable. A carefully managed gathering where old tensions could remain hidden behind polite greetings. But one conversation changed everything. Weeks later, palace insiders exposed what had happened behind closed doors. Harry had privately approached Charles during the reception and asked for a direct path back into sensitive family discussions, triggering an internal debate the palace desperately wanted contained. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered the evening expecting restraint, not confrontation. Sandringham, the royal family's private Norfolk estate, gives relatives a quieter space than public ceremonies, and that privacy mattered because family members and household officials could speak privately. William watched carefully. Camilla noticed the shifts too, yet neither could ignore the moment Harry moved toward his father and asked for something more serious than a warmer family welcome. Harry wanted direct involvement in discussions affecting his place within the monarchy. He wanted decisions touching his position or family to reach him through Charles rather than through aides, statements, or headlines. Charles said almost nothing at first. The king folded his hands, studied his son, and finally told him that family reconciliation and institutional responsibility were not the same thing. For Harry, the distinction landed hard. He had come seeking proof that the emotional door remained open, but his father was warning that trust inside the crown followed different rules. William saw the change when Harry left that private exchange. The prince did not follow him or demand an explanation, but his expression tightened because the request touched a question he had never considered settled. Could forgiveness inside a family exist without restoring access inside the institution? Camilla sensed the strain in Charles as well. The queen consort stayed close enough to recognize that something important had shifted, yet he offered no explanation. Then the real danger surfaced. A senior courtier prepared a confidential written account of the conversation soon after the reception. A courtier is a trusted royal household member who assists senior royals with official and private duties. That summary recorded Harry's appeal and the boundaries Charles had drawn around it. Weeks later, details escaped the small circle meant to see them. What made the leak explosive was one final detail. Harry had not walked into Sandringham alone in thought. Several family members already knew he intended to approach Charles, and one had quietly encouraged him. To understand why that private appeal struck so deeply, the story now moves beyond palace procedure and toward the three men who stood to lose the most. Behind the constitutional language were three men carrying wounds that had never healed in the same way. Harry came to Sandringham, wanting proof that the door was not permanently closed. Charles wanted his son near, without reopening every institutional battle of the past. William wanted something harder, certainty. And when those three needs collided inside one royal house, even a quiet conversation became something far more dangerous than an argument. Harry had not gone into that private exchange asking for a ceremony, a title, or a public restoration. What he wanted was something far more personal. Proof that reconciliation meant more than being welcomed into a room for a few hours. The monarchy, the institution built around the sovereign and the family members who support the crown, had rules about access, information, and responsibility. Harry understood that. What hurt him was the feeling that decisions touching his own life could still travel through aides and official channels before anyone in his family spoke to him directly. Charles felt the weight differently. After the reception, the king sat alone with the courtier's written summary and read the same paragraph twice. A courtier is a trusted member of the royal household who helps manage official and private matters around senior royals. He placed the document down and stared ahead without speaking. Every sentence sounded administrative, but each one described his own son. He wanted Harry close enough to rebuild trust, yet he feared that reopening institutional access too quickly could reignite battles the family had barely survived. William carried the hardest edge. The prince believed access had to be rebuilt through consistency, not inherited automatically through blood. When he learned that Harry had asked to receive advance notice of decisions that could affect his public standing, he became more cautious. His brother had not simply asked for warmer contact, he had raised the possibility of being informed before certain royal decisions were announced. To William, that crossed from family healing into institutional trust. Harry later admitted his frustration in a private conversation with a trusted family contact. He said every attempt to speak as a son seemed to come back to him like an application being reviewed. The anger did not last. Disappointment replaced it. Charles had been warm when the conversation stayed personal, yet the moment royal responsibility entered the room, the king became guarded. Camilla noticed that shift almost immediately. She watched Charles grow quieter after reading the written account, and finally asked whether the conversation had gone badly. The queen consort expected a careful answer. Instead, he said only, "It went further than I expected." She understood at once that Harry had asked for more than reassurance, and the monarch was now carrying a question he had not prepared to answer. Yet the most important truth remained hidden. Harry had not created the idea of approaching Charles on his own. Someone inside the family had told him that Sandringham was the one place where his father might truly listen. And once that encouragement comes into focus, the reception no longer looks spontaneous, it begins to look like the final step in something that had started weeks earlier. The confrontation at Sandringham did not begin at Sandringham. Its true origin was a private December telephone call that lasted less than 20 minutes but changed Harry's expectations completely. During that conversation, he was told that Charles had grown tired of communicating through layers of intermediaries. The message sounded simple. If Harry wanted clarity, he needed to ask his father himself. What happened next turned encouragement into a royal crisis. Harry had spent weeks growing more frustrated with the distance between himself and the family. Important developments seemed to reach him through aides, carefully worded messages, or public announcements instead of directly from Charles. The king understood why that hurt, but he also feared creating a formal channel that could be mistaken for a return to active royal duty. An active royal role means carrying out official work on behalf of the crown, with access and responsibilities that go beyond ordinary family contact. Charles wanted connection without creating a promise he was not ready to make. Anne finally broke through the stalemate during that December call. Princess Anne listened as Harry described the exhaustion of never knowing whether he should contact his father directly or wait for somebody else to make the first move. She did not comfort him with easy promises. Instead, she told him plainly that if he wanted a real answer, he needed to stop sending messages through other people and speak to Charles face-to-face at Sandringham. Harry went quiet. The suggestion sounded simple, but both of them knew it was not. Sandringham offered something unusual because the winter gathering allowed family members to be together without every conversation becoming a scheduled constitutional meeting. A constitutional meeting is a formal discussion tied to the monarch's official duties and responsibilities. That meant Harry could speak to Charles as a son first, before the conversation became something larger. Anne warned him before ending the call. She told him that once he raised the issue directly, there would be no pretending the tension did not exist. Harry answered that uncertainty had become worse than rejection. He would rather hear a difficult answer from his father than continue wondering what silence meant. Anne heard the resolve in his voice, and she understood the risk. William learned about the plan before the reception. Anne told the prince because she did not want him blindsided if the conversation changed the mood of the evening. He immediately understood the danger. Harry intended to ask for better family communication, but the future king knew that emotional requests had a way of crossing into institutional territory. Harry changed the request during the journey to Sandringham. What began as a desire for direct contact grew into something more ambitious. Limited inclusion in discussions affecting his royal position. By the time he approached Charles, the line had already moved, and that difference changed everything. Harry thought he was asking not to be shut out. William would hear something else entirely. When the brothers finally faced each other without intermediaries, restraint would give way to the confrontation everyone had been trying to avoid. The confrontation was not explosive because anyone shouted. It was explosive because neither brother did. Inside a small sitting room at Sandringham, William closed the door. Harry remained standing, and years of unresolved mistrust compressed into a conversation neither could escape. The prince had one question. Was Harry asking for a relationship with the family, or for access to the institution he had stepped away from? Harry's answer changed the temperature instantly. William had already learned exactly what Harry had raised with Charles, and that knowledge made the meeting unavoidable. No aides were present. No advisor could soften a sentence before it landed. The institution William was defending was not simply the royal family itself, but the formal system of duties, confidential information, and responsibilities surrounding the crown. To the future king, advance access carried obligations. To Harry, exclusion from decisions that affected him personally felt like punishment disguised as procedure. William pulled a chair backward, but never sat down. Harry stayed where he was. The prince finally said what had been building inside him. You cannot ask for half the institution when it suits the moment. His brother answered immediately. He was not asking to walk back into royal life unchanged, he said. He was asking not to be treated like a stranger whenever decisions involving his own name or family were made behind closed doors. Harry's anger then gave way to something deeper. He told William that the real humiliation was repeatedly learning about family developments from people outside the family itself. He could accept boundaries. What he struggled to accept was silence. The prince heard the pain beneath the argument, and for a moment his own anger softened. But he refused to let sympathy settle the larger question. Trust, he insisted, could not be restored simply because the hurt was real. William then revealed something Harry had not expected. Anne had told him before the reception that this conversation was coming. Princess Anne, his aunt and one of the family's most direct voices, had shared the warning so the future king would not be blindsided. Harry's expression changed. He did not accuse her of betrayal, but the discovery stung. What he had believed was a private attempt to reach his father had already become something others were preparing to manage. Then William surprised him. He would not support automatic restoration of confidential briefings, private updates given before sensitive royal decisions become public. But he would consider something narrower. Charles, he said, could personally decide when information directly affecting Harry should reach him first. The brothers left without agreement, yet the argument had shifted. William had refused the broad request, but opened a smaller door, and that placed the burden exactly where neither brother could carry it. Charles would have to decide whether fatherhood could influence the machinery of kingship, and behind another closed door, the king was about to discover just how lonely that authority could become. By the following morning, the argument was no longer about what Harry wanted or what William feared. It had become Charles's decision. On the desk before him sat the written account of the reception, a recommendation from senior household officials, and a blank page for his own instruction. The king could widen the door, close it, or create something in between. Every option protected one part of his life by risking another. Charles knew the choice could not simply be handed to advisors. Household officials could explain the risks, but only he could decide how directly his younger son should be contacted. Working royal duties are the official responsibilities carried out on behalf of the monarch, and Harry's departure from that role meant any new access could easily be mistaken for a partial return. The compromise placed before the king was narrow. Harry would receive direct notice only when a decision specifically affected him or his immediate family, while broader confidential planning would remain closed. Charles removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he asked everyone to leave. Alone, the monarch reread Harry's request and stopped at the same sentence twice. On paper, the issue looked procedural. To him, it was painfully simple. How much trust could he offer without opening another wound? And how much distance could he enforce before his son stopped believing there was a relationship left to save? Anne refused to let him hide behind caution. Princess Anne spoke to her brother later that morning and told him that endless hesitation could become its own decision. She understood why the king feared blurring family contact with royal access. But she also understood what silence had already done. Charles warned her that reconciliation carried consequences beyond emotion. She answered that permanent distance carried consequences too. William complicated the matter further. The prince had not demanded a total refusal, and that surprised his father. Instead, he supported tightly controlled communication if Charles personally decided what Harry should be told. The future king still opposed restoring automatic briefings, but his position removed the easiest excuse for closing the door completely. Charles finally picked up the pen. He approved direct notification to Harry whenever a decision specifically concerned him, but refused to restore general confidential briefings or institutional access. Confidential briefings are private updates shared before sensitive royal decisions become public. The king underlined that limitation once, then set the pen down. For a moment, the solution looked balanced. Harry would no longer be left entirely outside decisions that touched him, while William's concerns about wider access remained protected. Charles had found the narrowest possible bridge between fatherhood and duty, but the compromise created something else: paperwork. Copies of the Sandringham summary had already begun moving through more hands than the king realized. A fragile solution had finally been found, yet the very document created to contain the crisis was about to become the instrument that exposed it. Harry expected disagreement. He expected boundaries. What he did not expect was to discover that the most vulnerable conversation of his visit had been written down, circulated, and eventually leaked. The moment the details reached him, the issue changed completely. It was no longer whether Charles trusted him enough to share information. Harry now had to confront a far more painful question. Could he trust the palace to keep anything he said to his father private? Harry received the first message while alone. He read the details once, locked his phone, then opened it again, as if the words might somehow change. They did not. His request for advance notice was there. William's objections were there. Even Charles's limited compromise had escaped the circle meant to contain it. A confidential household summary is an internal written record used to preserve important information for senior royal staff, not something intended for public circulation. Yet Harry was now seeing his private appeal reduced to lines that strangers could debate. Harry called Charles almost immediately. His anger was sharp, but humiliation cut deeper. He told his father that words spoken as a son had somehow become evidence in a palace argument. The king sounded shaken and insisted that he had never authorized the disclosure. Harry did not accuse him personally. Instead, he said the intention mattered less than the result. The system surrounding his father had taken a deeply private conversation and turned it into something other people could carry, copy, and eventually release. Charles moved quickly once the scale of the breach became clear. He ordered officials to establish exactly who had received the Sandringham account and why. The household did not rush into a public denial, because challenging every detail would risk confirming even more of the private discussion. Instead, attention turned inward. The king wanted to know how something created to preserve continuity had escaped the people trusted to protect it. The review produced an uncomfortable answer. More officials had received copies than Charles understood, because the conversation touched several sensitive areas at once: communications, security arrangements, household planning, and constitutional boundaries. Constitutional boundaries are the limits separating personal family relationships from decisions connected to the crown's official role. Each department had been given a reason to know part of the story. Together, they created too many points of exposure. Then one detail changed the atmosphere entirely. A printed copy distributed during a staff briefing could not immediately be accounted for. No one could say with certainty where it had gone after the meeting. Charles understood what that meant. Harry understood it too. The leak might not have been accidental at all. Yet betrayal produced one consequence nobody expected. William contacted Harry directly. The prince did not call to defend the palace or repeat his earlier objections. He called because the leak had forced him to recognize something he had resisted admitting. Harry was already preparing to pull away again. But this time, the brother he least expected was moving toward him, and there would be no courtiers, no written summaries, and no institutional buffer between what they finally had to say. For once, nobody wrote down what was said. William and Harry met privately, with no aides waiting outside to summarize the conversation, and no official agenda placed between them. The leak had damaged trust, but it had also stripped away the language both men had been hiding behind. William could no longer speak only about duty. Harry could no longer speak only about exclusion. What followed became the turning point neither had managed at Sandringham. William asked for the meeting because he no longer wanted another layer of palace machinery between them. The prince made one condition clear before they began. Nothing he said would be turned into an internal note by him. An internal note is a written record prepared for household continuity or decision-making, and after the leak, even that ordinary practice had become emotionally dangerous. Harry understood the point immediately. This time, the conversation would belong to the brothers before it belonged to anyone else. William spoke first. He still believed Harry's original request had gone too far, and he did not soften that judgment. But the future king admitted something more difficult. He had entered their earlier confrontation, expecting his brother to create a problem. He had listened for risk before listening for pain. Seeing Harry's private words circulated had forced him to understand why palace process itself could feel threatening rather than neutral. Harry did not use the admission as a victory. Instead, he gave one of his own. He conceded that he had blurred two different needs together. He wanted direct communication from his family, but he had also pushed for institutional access he had not rebuilt enough trust to receive. Institutional access means entry to confidential information and decision-making connected to the Crown's official work. Saying it aloud changed the room. For the first time, neither brother was arguing against a version of the other. William then offered something practical. If a future family decision directly concerned Harry, he would not deliberately allow his brother to learn about it through public channels first, when direct contact was reasonably possible. Harry accepted that this was not restoration. It was respect. And that distinction mattered. Harry and William chose to tell Charles together rather than sending separate accounts. The king listened without interrupting, as both sons explained the agreement they had reached. Charles kept his original boundary in place. Limited direct notification could continue, but broader confidential briefings would not return. He added one important change. Personal conversations would generate far fewer written summaries, unless there was a clear institutional reason to create one. Charles understood that the decision would not repair every wound. William knew trust would still require time. Harry knew the Crown had not reopened its doors in the way he once imagined. Yet the immediate conflict had changed from accusation to clarity. Inside the family, the temperature was finally falling. Outside the gates, however, the leaked Sandringham story was about to become a national spectacle, and the public version would be far less restrained than the private truth. By sunrise, a conversation once confined to Sandringham had become a national argument about loyalty, forgiveness, privilege, and family. To some, Harry's request proved he still wanted one foot inside royal life. To others, the leaked summary proved exactly why he distrusted palace machinery. But one image crystallized the entire controversy. A newspaper front page that transformed a complicated family negotiation into 4 brutal words the public could instantly understand. Harry watched the coverage from a distance and quickly understood the trap. Commentators were debating whether he wanted selective royal access, while others argued that his request for direct information was simply what any son might expect from his own family. The palace, meaning the wider royal household and staff structure supporting the monarch's official work, refused to release the private document or fight publicly over individual sentences. Charles's team believed that doing so would only expose more of the conversation they were trying to protect. Harry could have answered every accusation. He chose not to. For the first time, he understood that defending himself in detail would mean repeating the very private words whose exposure had caused the damage. His frustration remained, but restraint replaced reaction. Silence now became a form of control rather than defeat. Charles felt the cost from the opposite side. The king watched part of a televised panel discussion with Camilla nearby, as speakers argued over whether reconciliation with his son was even possible. The queen consort remained quiet while he listened. Then he switched off the television midway through the debate and said the leak had made them look further apart at exactly the moment they had finally begun moving closer. She understood why that hurt. The family had reached a fragile internal compromise, yet Britain was now seeing only conflict. Then the headline landed. A London newspaper appeared with Harry's Sandringham plea across its front page beneath an image of the estate gates. By mid-morning, copies were being held outside Buckingham Palace, while broadcasters framed the story as a test of whether royal reconciliation could survive institutional mistrust. Buckingham Palace is the monarch's principal official London residence and one of the most recognizable symbols of the crown. That made the scene more than ordinary media attention. The argument had reached the monarchy's front door. Charles responded quietly rather than publicly. His household reduced circulation of written records covering purely personal family conversations, and began reviewing exactly which officials genuinely needed access to them. Harry was not told every detail of that internal change, but he learned enough to understand that the leak had forced the system to adjust. The public kept arguing about who had won. Harry had not regained broad access. Charles had not completely closed the door. William had not abandoned his concerns. Yet inside the family, the answer was already clearer than the headlines suggested. Sandringham had become a battlefield in public, but the final verdict would not be written by newspapers. It would be measured by what Charles, William, and Harry chose to preserve once the noise finally faded. In the end, Sandringham did not produce the dramatic restoration Harry once imagined, nor the permanent rejection some around the monarchy feared. It produced something quieter and more difficult: boundaries. Charles refused to pretend that family reconciliation automatically restored institutional trust. William refused to treat his brother's hurt as irrelevant, and Harry finally separated two battles he had allowed to become one: the fight to be heard by his family and the fight for a place within the crown. Harry did not regain general access to confidential royal planning, formal briefings, or a renewed working role. Formal briefings are private updates connected to official royal duties and sensitive decisions before they become public. Charles kept the limited arrangement exactly where he had placed it. His son could receive direct notice when a decision specifically affected him, but that did not restore wider participation in the institution. The king had drawn the line clearly, and this time Harry understood why it existed. Charles also changed something more personal. He stopped allowing every difficult exchange with his son to pass through layers of intermediaries whenever direct contact was possible. Harry accepted that family communication did not automatically create constitutional privileges. Those privileges are the official rights and responsibilities connected to the monarchy's public role, and he now understood that rebuilding personal trust was separate from reclaiming institutional access. Charles made that distinction unmistakable in their final conversation about Sandringham. The king told Harry that saying "not yet" to institutional trust had never meant "not wanted" as a son. Harry did not receive everything he had asked for, but those words mattered because they answered the fear beneath the entire confrontation. His father was not promising restoration. He was promising that rejection from the system did not have to mean rejection from the family. William held his position without the hostility that had defined their first confrontation. The prince still believed caution was necessary, and Harry finally accepted that his brother's resistance had not been driven entirely by punishment. The future king had been protecting an institution he expected one day to inherit. Their relationship was not suddenly healed, but something important had changed. Neither man needed to turn every disagreement into proof that the other had stopped caring. The leak had exposed something far more human than the headlines suggested. Harry had not secretly demanded titles or plotted a dramatic return. What the documented Sandringham account revealed was a man who still wanted direct recognition from the family he had left behind, and who had confused that emotional need with access to the crown. Charles learned something equally painful. A palace system designed to preserve continuity could become destructive when intimate family exchanges were reduced to paperwork and passed through too many hands. The king kept the boundaries, but he changed the way those boundaries were managed. Sandringham therefore became neither Harry's comeback nor his final exclusion. It became the moment reconciliation and restoration were finally separated. Harry left without reclaiming his former place inside the monarchy, but no longer uncertain that he still had a place inside the family. Charles protected the crown without closing the door on his son. William defended the institution without demanding permanent estrangement. And after years of confusion, all three men finally understood what had actually been at stake. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.